It's exciting, isn't it? The snow we've had in the last 48 hours, the way it's covered the whole city with a blanket of white, the way it has made the simple act of getting to church an adventure. So congratulations to those of you who made it, and to those of you who are still snug at home, joining us by way of this special live broadcast. Welcome to you. I'm glad you're here. Today is the fourth Sunday of Advent, which is exciting in its own way. When you've been celebrating this season for a while, these candles on the wreath begin to mean something to you. They not only stand for hope and peace and joy and love, they stand for the truth that Christmas is coming. So when you see all four candles lit as they are today, you know that Christmas is almost here. On Thursday of this week, we will gather in this room for a Christmas Eve service. We will light the Christ candle at the center of that wreath and pass its flame from one small candle to another until this whole room is filled with heavenly light. And then we will sing Silent Night, Holy Night, and it will all be so beautiful, grown men will weep. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In these Sundays leading up to Christmas, I've been preaching a series called The Word Made Flesh, in which we have looked at the traditional Advent themes of hope, peace, joy, and love, and thought about how each of those words was made flesh in the person of Jesus. I started with hope and talked about how you couldn't really appreciate that word unless at least once in your life you had been almost hopeless. It's the same with peace. You can't appreciate peace unless you have been through some kind of conflict, some kind of war. Last Sunday I talked to you about joy and how you can't just go out and get it. Joy has to come to you. Today I want to talk to you about love and about the many ways that word becomes flesh. It begins in the beginning, as you might expect. When babies are born, they don't know the word love. They don't know what it means. But over time, they may begin to associate that feeling with the people who feed them and bathe them and change their diapers, the ones who chuck them under the chin and talk baby talk to them, the ones who hold them in their arms. I have heard that a nursing child is at the optimum distance to focus on its mother's face, to see her looking back with love on her own face. Perhaps you've seen that. Mother and child locked in a loving, staring contest, so that when the child goes off to school later and the teacher tries to explain what the word love means, she might say, "You know what your mother feels for you." Fathers figure into this as well, although we are always at a bit of a disadvantage since we don't carry children in our wombs or nourish them with our own bodies. We have to make up for it by tossing them into the air and tickling them until they can't breathe. But in both cases, the word love takes on meaning for children as they have some experience of it, as they look at their parents and say, "Oh, that's what love is." I've already seen this in little James, who was dedicated today. When I hold him, he gets this anxious look on his face and begins to roll his eyes, wondering, who is this guy? But when I give him back to his parents, you can see his face flooded with joy and relief. He's only 6 months old, but he already knows who loves him. He's had some experience with that word. As we get a little older, we have other experiences with that word. When I was growing up in Wise, Virginia, for example, I had a best friend named Bobby Thompson. If you had asked me then if I loved him, I would have said, "No, absolutely not." I was too sissy. But I did love him. We used to walk around the playground at Wise Elementary School with our arms draped around each other's shoulders. It's how you showed people in those days at that school that you were best friends. It was Bobby who used to come to evening prayer meeting in his pajamas with his parents, where he once prayed for his little toy lawnmower that really worked. And it was Bobby a few years later who taught me how to ride a bicycle patiently after many, many attempts succeeding. And it was Bobby who explained to me one day while we were sitting in his front yard that the speed bump there on the road was engineered to throw escaped convicts from their cars when they sped through the neighborhood. You don't get that kind of information from just anybody, maybe only from a best friend. So we learn what the word love means from the people who love us, and then by loving someone who is like us, and eventually by loving someone who is unlike us, which happened for me a few years later. With apologies to those of you who have already heard this story, my family moved from Virginia to West Virginia, and I hated it. We had driven away from Wise in our old station wagon on a rainy night under cover of darkness. I remember watching those raindrops slide down the window glass as the tears slid down my own cheeks. If I had had anything to say about it, we wouldn't have moved at all. But I didn't have anything to say about it. I didn't want to leave Wise, the only home I had ever known. I didn't want to leave my best friend, Bobby Thompson, behind. But I did. I ended up at Pettus Elementary School in West Virginia, where the Farrell twins, Denny and Lenny, kept insisting that West Virginia was the best Virginia, to which I could only reply, no, it's not. I think you would agree. Our teacher, Mrs. Govey, made us sing this dumb song about those West Virginia hills, how majestic and how grand, with their summits bathed in glory like the Prince Emmanuel's land. Yeah, right. But after that painful year, we moved a few miles up the river to Seth, West Virginia, and on the day after Labor Day, I took my seat in Mrs. Bowen's fourth grade class and was just unpacking my pencil case when Bama Donahue came into the room. When I saw her, I felt something inside me that I had never felt before. I couldn't explain it, couldn't describe it, but I could not take my eyes off of her. She sat one row over and 2 seats ahead of me, which was the perfect place for me to observe her without being observed. I could steal glances at her straight brown hair, at her slender neck, at her unbelievably long eyelashes like Bambi's mother's. The only word I could attach to this feeling I was having was love. I was in love with this girl. I carried it around inside me quietly, stoically, never letting on and hoping that she couldn't hear my heart thumping in my chest when we ended up in the lunch line together. But on Valentine's Day, I was in the classroom early. It was just me and Mike Gordon and some girl in the back of the classroom who was unloading her book bag when Bama Donahue walked into the room clutching a handful of white envelopes with Valentines inside. She put them all into that big box at the front of the room, but she had one left in her hand, a different kind of Valentine, special. She brought it back to Mike Gordon's desk and put it down right there in front of him. He snatched it up, looked at it, and said, "I don't want that old thing." And she said, "Fine then." And she took it, clutched it to her chest, came over to my row, down the row to my desk, and slapped the Valentine down in front of me. It was homemade. Red construction paper with a sticker of 2 birds sitting very close to each other on a limb, musical notes floating above their heads, and these words written in Bama's own hand: "We could make beautiful music together." I didn't care that it was a second-hand Valentine. I picked it up and held it in my hands. I looked up at Bama with a quivering lower lip. I said,